Have you ever heard of the name Eike Batista, who once ranked 66 on the Forbes richest list? He may not be a familiar face to the general audience, but he has been celebrated for a lot of reasons. After all, he was Brazil's richest man at one point with a staggering net worth of over $35 billion. With several accolades to his name, Batista was a well-respected man. But he lost it all, and now has a negative net worth of $1 billion, while also facing jail time. So how did he transition from private jets and luxury sailing to a prison cell? Let's find out. Chapter 1: Early Life and Childhood. Batista was only the second of 7 children who were born to businessman Eliezer Batista, who was the Minister of Mines and Energy in the João Goulart and Fernando Collor administrations. Batista's dad was also a former president of Companhia Vale do Rio Doce, which is now known simply as Vale. Back then, it was wholly a state enterprise between 1961 to 1964 and 1979 to 1986. Batista's mother, Jutta Furkan, was born in Germany, and in his own words, Batista says that she had taught him self-esteem and discipline, both of which were considered to be attributes he believed were crucial to his development as an entrepreneur. After spending his childhood in Brazil, Batista and his family moved to Europe when he was a teenager. This was due to his father's occupation, which often caused them to switch places. The family lived in Geneva, Dusseldorf, and Brussels. In 1974, he began to study metallurgical engineering at the University of Aachen in Germany. When he was 18 years old, his parents returned to Brazil, but Batista remained abroad because he saw more opportunities to grow his skills as a businessman. He had begun selling insurance policies from door to door, which he relied on to make his living. In interviews, he often mentions that the stress and the lessons learned from this experience were essential for his education. All his friends, on the other hand, were super rich, which did seem to affect his own mentality. While speaking to the Australian Financial Review, Batista said, and I quote, "I got highly motivated to make some extra money and I sold insurance policies from door to door. It's a great learning experience because some doors open and some don't. I had a lot of teas with old ladies." But despite all these statements and life lessons, around 1979, he dropped out of college before he could finish his degree in metallurgical engineering. He had enough of this life and decided it would be best for him to return to Brazil. After school, he also tried exporting precious stones such as granite, marble, and diamonds. While talking to the Australian Financial Review about this particular activity, one of Batista's excerpts read, "I discovered it was controlled by the Italian mafia, so I quit that and began organizing pick and shovel miners to produce diamonds." Basically, the shovel miners, known as garimpeiros, would come to his Rio office with diamonds in little bags. Batista would then introduce them to Jewish dealers from Portugal and Antwerp so that he could collect commissions on each sale. Chapter 2: Getting into gold. In the early 1980s, Batista decided to shift all his attention towards gold. He recognized himself as a proper salesman and began contacting producers in the Amazon area. He also targeted buyers in large metropolitan centers in Brazil and Europe. When he was 23 years old, he started a gold trading firm called Outram Orum, using the Inca sun as the company trademark and logo. A year and a half later, the company had already earned around $6 million. This was primarily due to the fact that he was able to create a wide network of around 60 buyers in the Amazon for gold. The intel was right there in front of Batista, and he was not going to just sit there quietly, so he implemented the first mechanized alluvial gold mining plant in the Amazon. It was this decision that marked the beginning of the EBX Group. At the age of 29, Batista became the CEO of TVX Gold, a company listed on the Montreal Stock Exchange, which helped initiate his relationship with global capital markets and expand his network beyond his primary target areas. Here's a small indicator of how successful this venture was. From 1980 to 2000, Batista was able to create a whopping $20 billion in value with the operation of 8 gold mines in Brazil and Canada and a silver mine in Chile. If we want to look at operations beyond that, then between 1991 and 1996, the value of his company more than tripled. Willie McLucas, a former manager of a European resource fund that invested in TVX in the 1980s, revealed to The Age in an interview the price of gold was shooting up and the Cruzeiro, Brazil's currency, before the real was going down. Batista knew this before most other people, which is why he managed to stack his portfolio the right way. Since the whole gold trading operation was working out so well, Batista knew that founding his own gold mining company, TVX Gold, was the right move in 1980. The X in the name is supposed to signify multiplication, as in multiplication of wealth. Of course, it wasn't always smooth sailing for the man, as his bodyguard once had to kill a man and bury him in the Amazon. That's just how you play the game in this world, isn't it? In another excerpt from the Australian Financial Review, Batista was a gold trader at the time, traveling around the pick and shovel miners or garimperos in the Amazon jungle to buy their gold. He also financed some of them, and one digger had made no attempt to repay him for 6 months. Chapter 3: Shady Dealings. I'm not bragging. It's just a consequence of all the things that we have done. Just look at the assets. Jesus, by 2015, we will be making $10 billion. Between 2015 and 2020, that will double, or even triple. And those are discounted numbers I'm giving you. Yes, these were the exact words that Eike Batista said during his now infamous interview with the Sunday Times in March 2012. He was mainly targeting Mexican telecommunications magnate Carlos Slim as the world's richest man by 2015, and he made it seem as if it was a done deal without any kind of diplomatic engagement. Sure, his modesty might not have shown through over here, but his confidence certainly did, which was emblematic of the kind of person he is. He also told Bloomberg he absolutely had to get to #1 because of the competitive spirit that he acquired in his childhood. As per his own words, I suffered very heavy asthma, so my mother threw me in the cold swimming pool. So I cured my asthma through discipline, and I saw that you could achieve things by performing, and it's part of my DNA. I'm very competitive. Batista also said he wanted to repair Brazil's reputation. He said, and I quote, "Brazil lost 2 generations of Brazilians to the crisis between '84 and '97. Brazil probably paid $150 billion in extra risk spread during that time. The ratings agencies put Brazil in the same level as Nigeria, and today it's better than Germany." These are obviously excerpts from years ago. Batista was then Brazil's richest man, the 4th richest person in the world, and on a mission to the top. Now, it's quite a difference that happened in the 2 years which followed. But hey, let's not get there so soon. Let's talk about the kind of business he did. Batista was also not known to be a subtle man, as can be seen in the excerpt I am about to quote. On one of my tours, I went to see him and said, "Where is my money?" He went screaming mad. He was a drunk. I made the mistake of calling him a son of a batch filo da puta. I turned around and walked a few meters away and bang. He shot me in the back. Yes, this is from one of the unfortunate businessmen who was working closely with the billionaire tycoon. He continued by saying he was drunk. I was lying on the floor, and the other guys, who would be his bodyguards, only had the instinctive reaction to shoot him because they didn't know whether he would shoot them next. They buried the shovel miner in an unmarked grave at the end of the airstrip. As a matter of fact, Batista started to build a reputation for himself, wherein people would fear that he wasn't always straight in his dealings. In an excerpt from The Age, Macalucas says, Ike would go into the jungle and show these village chiefs a newspaper that's 10 days old. He would then tell them that it was the price of gold. However, the prices of gold had gone up and would go up even more by the time he got back to Rio. He'd pay the local chiefs in their own currency, which also happened to be dropping at the time. He would then sell the gold in hard currency. You just couldn't lose. Chapter 4: EBX and Other Companies. In 1983, Batista would go on to found the EBX company, which would go on to become the umbrella under which he would form all his other companies as well. Between 2004 and 2012, he would add another 6 public companies under the EBX umbrella. They were OGX, which was into oil, MPX, which was into energy, a logistics company named LLX, MMX, which was a mining company, OSX, an offshore industry, and the coal mining company known as CCX. The EBX group primarily produces iron ore in Minas Gerais and Mato Grosso do Sul, and has put the first commercial-scale solar power plant into operation in Brazil. It invested an estimated amount of around $15.5 billion between 2011 and 2012 into Brazil. The company is also responsible for projects of significant scale, such as the LLX ACU Superport in São João da Barra, Rio de Janeiro, the MMX Sudeste Superport in Araguai, Rio de Janeiro, and the MPX thermal power plants in Itiqui, Maranhão, and Paciem, Ceará. The amount of heavy funds going into these projects was not without reason. After all, Batista was always thinking a few steps ahead of the others. These important energy and infrastructure projects were being executed in parallel to OGX's exploratory campaigns in Campos dos Goitacazes, Rio de Janeiro, Santos, São Paulo, and Parnaíba, Maranhão Basin. The sheer magnitude of these activities had resulted in oil and gas discoveries that furthered the company even more. There were around 20,000 people working in the construction and operation of the group's projects in 2011. The EBX Group is headquartered in Rio de Janeiro and operates in 9 Brazilian states. It has multiple offices spread across in America. The main ones are in New York City, USA, Colombia, and Chile. In addition to the infrastructure and natural resources sectors, Batista's EBX Group also invests in real estate via their REX sector, entertainment via their IMX division, technology through the SIX sector, and catering through the NRX section. In Rio de Janeiro, EBX was developing a wide range of industries such as sports, hospitality, gastronomy, health and beauty initiatives. Of course, the idea was to try and get involved in as many industries as possible. Just like any other billionaire out there, Batista was diversifying himself and expanding his sources of revenue to safeguard his assets. However, since the early 2000s, he has focused primarily on natural resources, energy, and infrastructure. In April 2012, the EBX Group had contracted International Business Machines Corp. to outsource their IT operations, thus narrowing their focus even further. Next up was MMX, which happened to be the mining company of the EBX Group, as it had integrated logistics and low production costs. The company was given projects in the Brazilian states of Minas Gerais and Mato Grosso do Sul, as well as in Chile. After this, Batista decided to start yet another company known as MPX. It would operate as part of the energy industry in Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. The company has complementary businesses in power generation, coal mining and exploration, and production of natural gas as well. Of course, Batista wasn't just opening companies for the heck of it. He was achieving a lot, and MPX was a great example. For instance, this company was responsible for the first commercial solar power plant in Brazil in the city of Tawa. The company remained a key section of Batista's umbrella, but as part of the restructuring of the EBX companies at the time, MPX was renamed Eneva SA and is now controlled in the form of a joint venture by Germany's EONSE and Batista. Of course, Batista wasn't done with this because he wanted more and more with each achievement. So came along OGX, which was that part of the EBX Group company which would carry out activities in the exploration and production of oil and natural gas. Just like MPX, this firm also made quite the name for itself. As a matter of fact, OGX was responsible for the largest private sector exploratory campaign underway in Brazil. It would go on to claim an early success rate in exploratory wells of more than 90%. What's more is that they initially valued their deposits at more than $1 trillion, which was obviously ridiculous. It also didn't help that the company's wells turned out to be duds. Not every venture was a fairy tale success for Batista, as OGX eventually filed for bankruptcy protection on the 30th of October 2013. In December of 2013, its shareholders voted to rename the company Óleo e Gás Participações, or to put it in simple terms, OGPAR. Okay, now we're going to look at the logistics aspect of Batista's group with LLX. It was the operations company of the EBX Group and was responsible for building the ACU Superport in the state of Rio de Janeiro, which was projected to be the largest port industrial complex in Latin America. On the 11th of December 2013, LLX was renamed to Prumo Logistica Global by its new controlling parent, the EIG Group, based in the US. Finally, we've got the OSX company operating in the offshore shipbuilding industry and was constructing the largest shipyard in the Americas, known as the Embraer of the Sea at the ACU Superport. OSX had a lot of different segments, including shipbuilding, the charter of exploration and production, or EP equipment, and operation and maintenance, or OM. But unfortunately, things didn't really turn out well for this one either, as OSX Brazil made the filing in a Rio de Janeiro court in November of 2013, less than 2 weeks after its sister oil company, OGX, also declared bankruptcy. Now, I'm sure you guys must be thinking that these are a lot of failures for a man who was the richest in Brazil. Of course, I'm going to talk about all of that, but let's see what made him famous in the first place. Chapter 5: Marrying the Right Woman. Now, people don't really pay attention to rich billionaires unless they're eccentric and run Twitter like Elon Musk. Similarly, Batista wasn't really a popular person until he started living like a rock star. He eventually became a household name in 1991 when he eloped with model, actress, and carnival dancer Luma de Oliveira. For those of you who don't know her, Luma was an extremely famous name in Brazil, having worked in movies and posed for several popular magazines. Being involved with Luma definitely gave Batista access to a lot of Brazil's general audience, and it clearly looked like his main intention was simply to gain more recognition. The couple met in 1990, and at the height of their romance, they were the darlings of gossip mags and the mainstream media. Another point of interest is that Batista was seemingly married to a Brazilian socialite at the time named Patricia Leal. On top of that, Luma was pregnant when they got married, but she went ahead with the wedding despite the resistance from her fiancé's family. Want to know something even worse? Batista abandoned Patricia only a week before their wedding ceremony so that he could be with Luma. Batista and Patricia had already married religiously by then, so their union had to get annulled later by the Catholic Church. This allowed Patricia to get married 2 years later to Antonio Mayrink Veiga, who funnily enough was Luma's ex-boyfriend. Now, Luma claimed that she did not know who Batista's girlfriend was at the time, but she was aware that he wasn't single. Anyway, they had a rather shaky marriage, especially due to Batista objecting to Luma posing for racy magazines like Playboy. After over a decade of being with each other, the couple finally called it quits in 2004, when Batista divorced Luma. In the 4 years before this separation, they had a couple of boys, Thor and Olin. Chapter 6: The Boating Champion. Despite all the drama happening on the side, Batista wanted to make sure that everyone knew he was a billionaire. He started living the high life, and one of the ways he showed this was winning a lot of boating championship titles. In the 1990s, Batista was the Brazilian, US, and world champion in the super offshore powerboat class. In 2006, he covered the 220 nautical miles between Santos and Rio de Janeiro in just a sliver over 3 hours, and beat the record for the course in his boat, known as the Spirit of Brazil. He was so proud of it that he promoted this achievement to the point where even his Dow Jones profile had this information. Adding to this was a ludicrous collection of cars, yachts, and private jets. Batista was rich, and he wanted the world to know it. Chapter 7: Building a Legacy. In 2011, Batista was listed by the coveted Forbes magazine as the 8th richest person in the world and the richest person in Brazil. His wealth was at one time estimated to be around over $35 billion US. Batista was also featured in Bloomberg Markets magazine as the only Brazilian on the list of the 50 most influential people in global finance, published for the first time in September of 2011. The magazine focused on people whose comments moved markets, whose deals set the value of companies or securities, and whose ideas and policies shaped corporations, governments, and economies. This only further cemented the fact that Batista was a certified celebrity. At the end of 2010, the magazine ranked Batista as the 58th most powerful person in the world, placing him as Brazil's most powerful person after the president of Brazil at the time, Dilma Rousseff. The newspaper Folha de São Paulo described Batista as a self-made man, who became an entrepreneur with a fortune acquired primarily through his own efforts, not inheritance. 3 years before this esteemed declaration, the highest-ranked Brazilian on the Forbes magazine list in March 2008 was Antonio Armirio de Moraes, in 77th place with a family estate of roughly $10 billion US. Another 17 Brazilians were on the list, including Batista, who had said that his goal was to become the richest man in the world in 5 years. At this rate, he surely looked like he was going to achieve what he had promised. Even so, if you look at Batista's fortune in 2008, it was estimated at around $6.6 billion US, and he was ranked at the 142nd place on the list of the richest men in the world. By 2009, he had moved up to the 61st position and was considered the richest man in Brazil. According to the Brazilian weekly magazine Epoca, Batista was one of the 100 most influential men in Brazil of 2010. Isto magazine also listed Batista as one of the 100 most influential people in 2010. In 2011, Batista was included in the 1,000 CEOs ranking by Dinheiro magazine. Batista's rise to billionaire status attracted a lot of attention from the media, which dubbed him King Midas. However, due to his excessive spending and high-profile divorce, there were people and institutions who were doing their best to present him differently to the public. Despite the negative press, Batista continued to win the admiration of many Brazilians, who applauded his goal of making Brazil one of the world's top economic powers. In 2009, his financial support helped Rio de Janeiro to win its bid for the 2016 Olympic Games. This helped improve his reputation because he managed to prove to the public that he wasn't just putting on a show for people to see. He also had genuine care and concern for his own country, which was why he was willing to risk it all on its progress. So where did it all go wrong for him? Chapter 8: The Downfall. Okay, now let me summarize everything for you. Batista was about to make some big bucks because of all his heavy investments in the oil industry. These were backed by years and years of hard work, an expert team which he had onboarded, and a massive supply of cash. However, a decline in world petroleum prices and the Brazilian economy coincided with the failure of OGX oil fields to produce at the rates predicted by Batista. As that production declined, Batista struggled to pay off the bond debt he had amassed while expanding his oil exploration and production operations. In October of 2013, he defaulted by quite a bit on an interest payment of $45 million. His empire began to crumble, and he was forced to sell off all his assets. Yes, this also includes the ridiculous heaps of jets and yachts he had bought to impress the public. By 2015, his net worth was negative, having fallen to more than $1 billion in debt. Now, let's see how the whole fiasco unfolded. Batista's troubles can be traced all the way back to the launch of OGX in 2008, even though they would only reveal themselves much later. The oil and gas company was launched and listed on the basis that it would explore prospects around Brazil, but without any actual fields in operation, which was not the orthodox way to go. It was always a risky proposal, but Batista had assembled a trustworthy team of experts behind his project, as all of them were ex-Petrobras with a wealth of experience in drilling in Brazil. Batista was riding the slipstream of the discovery of Brazil's enormous ultra-deep-sea crude oil reserves, known as the Pre-Sal region off the southeast coast of the country. OGX's IPO would go on to raise $3.7 billion and was Brazil's biggest ever IPO at the time. Quite a record, isn't it? However, in 2012, news broke out that OGX was slashing production in what had been touted as its biggest oil asset off the Rio de Janeiro coast. Something was fishy about this because there was a lot of positive news going into this deal. It soon became clear that for all of Batista's skilled sales pitches that would convince his investors, there was nothing supporting the hype of OGX from a fundamental perspective. When the company announced that it would be winding down production by 2015, it was producing 10,000 barrels of crude oil a day. For an independent entity, it's not bad, but we should also consider the fact that 10,000 barrels was barely a fifth of what it had promised in the IPO prospectus 5 years earlier. Shares tumbled by an astounding 99%, and bonds were being traded at 8% of their face value. However, this was just the beginning of Batista's problems, mainly because he had gained a lot to eventually lose. In the 5 years between OGX going public and then going bust, Batista seemed to be caught up in what can only be labeled now, with the benefit of retrospection, as unrestrained megalomania. He was doing well when he was only focusing on the businesses he had actually studied and worked hard on. However, he lost track of his vision and ended up extending himself from energy production to showy and luxurious entertainment and hospitality ventures. No, seriously, if you look at the way Batista was diversifying himself, you'd wonder as if he made more money than God. At one point, an EBX subsidiary was bidding for the Maracana Stadium concession. Sounds silly, right? Well, they also won the contract to renovate and run a historic hotel in downtown Rio. If that wasn't enough, Batista and his umbrella were running the Rock in Rio Festival, which is a 10-day party that brings the biggest names in pop music to Brazil. These showy initiatives not only lost Batista a lot of money when it eventually became clear that his funds were being terribly mismanaged, but they also lost him a lot of standing with the Brazilian public. After all that effort to get to know him, the very people who Batista was trying to impress would stop thinking of him as an aspirational figure. As a matter of fact, they started seeing him as something of a brazen show-off. After plans for a gold mine in Greece went bust because of political opposition, the once high-flyer TVX took a decided turn for the worse. And then the price of gold started to fall, reaching a paltry $300 an ounce. Batista resigned in 2001 after the mine began to run out of cash, and soon enough, he was forced to put it up for sale. As OGX started to disentangle itself, Batista's almost humorous capitalization strategy became apparent, and the ultimate demise of EBX became a diary of a death foretold. Batista had relied heavily on government support, not only in terms of bidding for concessions, but also an investment through the Brazilian Development Bank, also known as the BNDES. As of October 31st, the bank stood to lose up to a total of 6 billion Brazilian real, around $2.61 billion of direct investment in the financing of EBX projects. The umbrella's main companies were all built upon the same foundations, which was the opportunity to profit from Brazil's abundant mineral reserves by investing in the infrastructure that the government would be unable to build by itself. Batista was building ports, ships, energy infrastructure, and mines, but the main issue was that all of his companies were interconnected. Due to this, MMX's mining products would be shipped from LLX's multi-use port, which would also be used as an oil hub for OGX's products, and, well, I suppose you guys have figured out how messed up the cycle was. When OGX and its billions of dollars worth of debt came crashing down, it dragged down the whole lot of them at the same time. This is not to say that Batista was a fool who did not know what he was doing. He taught himself the basics of business and even started his work life by peddling insurance from door to door. There is no denying the fact that he had amazing skills as a salesman. After all, he built a house of cards worth $30 billion by coaxing investors, banks, and the Brazilian government to believe that his superstructure of companies could be the answer to all of Brazil's infrastructure needs. He sold a dream to all of these individuals and institutions. However, by the time we reached 2012, it was obvious that the man lacked the management skills to make that dream function past the sales pitch. Batista had not only built his conglomerate in such a way that his main companies relied heavily on each other to succeed, but he also severely leveraged OGX, which was by far his most ambitious enterprise, on his other, already successful companies. When OGX announced it was suspending operations, Batista was leveraged up to his ears and started to regret all those promises he made when he was on top. In June, Batista was seeing EBX on the verge of a humiliating collapse, so he took out a full-page editorial in the O Globo and the Valor newspapers. It seems to have been described by the local media as a mea culpa of sorts, in which he confronted without any hesitation the perception that he benefited from what he describes in his own words as, quote, a rampant wave of capital building, that he surfed on a wave of an inflated market, that, without any apparent reason, offered him a blank check with a few billion with which to play at being an entrepreneur. Now, he did make an effort, but even though Batista admitted this to be how he had come to be seen by the market and the public, the editorial did nothing to enlighten any one of those opinions. Batista confidently placed the blame for OGX's shortcomings on the ranks of the executives he had drafted in from other oil and gas companies to help him develop the company. In his rant, he all but accused these people of having overinflated expectations with their optimistic analysis of the market and the company itself. He said, and I quote, "I was as surprised as any of my investors, collaborators in the market." He clearly spared no one when he said that these people were the ones responsible for the losses accrued by OGX. In a very personal message to the world, Batista said, "More than anything, I ask myself where I have erred. What should I have done differently? The first issue is probably linked to the financing model I chose for my companies." Batista suggested that by relying on the stock market, he condemned his companies to their failure. He also admitted to being too eager when it came to all the initiatives he took part in. Once again, he said, and I quote, "If I could turn back time, I would not have resorted to the stock market. I would have structured private equity that would have allowed me to build the companies from zero and develop them each over 10 years. Well, those words may have sounded brutally honest, but they made no difference to his fate. Though Batista is not wrong when he identifies his financing model as a major factor contributing to the undoing of his empire, his inability to take responsibility over the mismanagement of his many investments is worrying. Like, how could a billionaire let something like this happen in the first place? He built it all right from scratch, and he destroyed it himself as well. Now, he has managed to sell off the least damaged of the X companies. LLX was bought by EIG Global Energy Partners, MMX was sold to Trafigura, who is a Dutch commodity trader, and Mubadala, Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund. Adding insult to injury, MPX was bought by EON and renamed Eneva. The Colombian coal mines are also being sold, but this won't be enough to offset the damages. After all, there are billions of dollars in debts to service, and the rest of his smaller enterprises continue to struggle. Throughout the collapse of OGX and the subsequent quartering of EBX, it became increasingly apparent that for all of Batista's confidence, his enthusiastic showmanship, his jolly arrogance and ostentatious lifestyle, deep down he remained the same door-to-door peddler of his youth. He was a good salesman, but his shortcomings as manager and executive proved that he did not have the sustainable approach. As it would turn out, this was the shortcoming that caused his downfall. Chapter 9: Bribes, Scandals, and Arrests. Despite all that had already hit him, the troubles didn't seem to end for Batista. In January of 2017, the Brazilian authorities issued a detention order for Batista and 8 other individuals as part of their Portuguese Operação Lava Jato, which translates to Operation Car Wash. This was a high-profile money laundering investigation which had suspected upwards of $100 million in fraud. Batista returned from New York and was immediately detained in the maximum security prison in Bangu. On April 28 of 2017, the Supreme Court Judge Gilmar Mendes ordered for Batista's release pending trial. This was a suspicious decision, and it led media outlets to suspect that Batista was also going to be charged with corruption. It was then confirmed that he had made around $16.5 million in bribes to one of the top officials of the Rio de Janeiro state. Finally, on the 3rd of July 2018, Batista was convicted of bribing former Rio de Janeiro Governor Sergio Cabral for the purpose of obtaining state government contracts, paying Cabral the amount I stated earlier, and was sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment. He spent 3 months in an ordinary prison and was ruled to be able to roam freely while the case moved forward, but there's a lot that's going against him. Batista's lawyer Fernando Martins would obviously appeal the verdict, but it's fair to say that his client is not likely going to get out of this mess easily. Chapter 10: Conclusion and Final Thoughts. Before his criminal conviction, Batista was widely considered Brazil's most daring and successful entrepreneur of a generation. He was a maverick mining tycoon, a playboy, almost like a realistic version of Iron Man but without the suit. However, he is now the symbol of a new time in the country that is struggling to recover economically whilst trying to turn a page on a history of corruption. No other country in the world has had quite a dramatic reversal of fortune as Brazil in the past decade. Batista is now facing a lengthy legal struggle against his creditors as he tries to limit losses. EBX is on full damage control mode now. They have filed a number of suits with the Brazilian justice system in an attempt to stay off bankruptcy and avoid trouble with the creditors, but all of these efforts remain unresolved. Despite his dramatic fall, Eike announced in 2020 his plans to restart MMX and return to the mining business. His resilience and determination to rise again are notable, though it remains to be seen how successful his second attempt at entrepreneurship will be. Batista's personal fortune was once estimated at around $35 billion, but it had quickly dwindled to around $200 million. Around this time, 3 of his private jets and a helicopter had been sold. Now he has a negative net worth of $1 billion, so there's no coming back for him. It is unclear how Batista will manage to extricate himself from the tangle of debts and collapsing contracts he has woven around himself, but it will take years before he can truly move on from this disaster. Perhaps he should have taken note of the old proverb, "Jack of all trades, master of none." Like, share, and subscribe if you liked the video, and feel free to suggest any topics you'd like to see in my future videos. See you soon.